Good morning. We are live. Welcome to RE Journal's Breaking Through the Disruption webinar series. We're nearing the end of our webinars because soon we're going to be doing live events coming to you in Indiana on July 8th, Texas on June 24th. I'm so excited to get back to meeting real people. I don't know if we're going to be able to shake hands, but at least we can see each other in person. The first thing I got to do here is thank all these sponsors. I got to get our pictures out of the way so I can do that. But without all these sponsorships, we as a company wouldn't have been able to pivot from live events into webinars. So thank you to all of these people who helped us become a webinar company. And now we have a YouTube channel. So thank you to these folks. McShane Construction, Clayco, IWLA, Link, Connor Commercial Real Estate, IAMC, Midwest Industrial Funds. I'm going to lose my breath reading all the sponsors. SIOR, Colliers, FE Morgan Fire Protection, CRG Solutions. Let me move us around down there. There we go. Sparrowhawk, Premier Design Build, Centerpoint. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Whoever's pushing my slide buttons, don't push them. You're going to drive me nuts. Okay, this is us, RE Journals. In case you didn't know, we expanded into and we acquired Red News, Minnesota Real Estate Journal, Illinois Real Estate Journal. We now have 6 publications in 17 states. If you have connection issues, I'm looking at our dedicated server. I see 5 bars. So if you have connection issues, it's probably on your end. It's you, not me. But there's a quick reconnect button at the top of your screen. So if you see a speaker freeze up or you can't hear somebody, try pushing that button. If you end up pushing that button a lot of times, then I would make sure you're using Google Chrome on a PC, or if you're on your phone, iPhone, Safari, or if you're on an Android, use Google Chrome on that as well. Let's see, there's a chat room to your right. I see some people have already found it. Go in there, put your name, your company, the state you're in, and you can start networking with people. It's a good spot to meet new people, but this is also where you'll be able to ask questions of our panelists. So our esteemed moderator, Pete, will be able to see the questions in there and get to them when he can. And polls. So I will put up a poll, maybe 2 if we have time. That's going to cover up your chat room. Just answer the poll, and it'll close it back down, and then you go back to seeing the chats. Like I said at the beginning, we have our own YouTube channel, but it's accessible by our website. You can see all of the past 45 or so webinars we've had, and you'll be able to see this one later this afternoon. And so you have the ability to share these, watch them again. All right, I'm out of here. We have National Industrial Real Estate Update. We've got an awesome panel, very informative, and we've got a great moderator. I'm leaving you in good hands. So, Pete Quinn, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll step out of the way.
I appreciate that very much. I want to welcome everybody. If you're like me, and I'm sure most of you are, we've been on a lot of webinars, Zoom meetings, conference calls, more in the last 3 months than I have in my 30-plus year career. Some really good ones, and there's been some ones that I felt like I wasted a little bit of my life being on. This one, I guarantee you'll get something out because we do have an outstanding panel, probably the best panel that I've been involved with. And so we're going to make this very, very casual. We're going to talk about some issues that are going on. Everybody's got a lot of questions. I'm going to introduce myself, tell you a little bit about me, and then I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves individually. But the last 3 months has been, well, first of all, my name, again, Pete Quinn. I'm the National Director of Industrial for Colliers. And I've been in that role for almost 4 years now. Have really, really enjoyed it. This last 3 months has been a very, very unique experience, like it has for all of us. I travel a lot. Most of my job involves me traveling. And this particular 3 months on the phone constantly, day in and day out, constantly looking for information. This webinar is going to provide you with some good updated information and get a lot of people's opinions. I kind of like the last 3 months, which kind of sounds kind of strange, but it's been nice not being on planes 20 days a month and in hotel rooms. And I've really connected with a lot of people, and I'm seeing a lot of optimism out there on a lot of fronts. Going through the civil unrest we're experiencing right now, the pandemic, we've had our challenges, the tanking of the stock market, the recovery of the stock market, a lot going on. Today, we're going to focus about the real estate aspect of it. So with that, I'm going to start introducing or having the panelists introduce themselves. I want to start with Nick Pell, who is the president and the chief investment officer for Link Industrial. Nick, go ahead.
Thanks. Pete, can you hear me okay? Just checking.
Hear you perfectly.
Perfect. Yeah, so as Pete mentioned, I'm Nick Pell, President and Chief Investment Officer of Link. We are Blackstone's U.S. Operating platform for their logistics business. The platform today is approximately 400 million square feet across 3,000 different assets in the U.S. We're investing capital out of 3 different real estate investment vehicles that Blackstone has, a core plus vehicle, a private REIT that's income oriented, as well as their flagship real estate opportunity fund. And we've been very active this year, just continuing to build out our platform and team. We have 300 individuals, 15 offices across the U.S., many of which a lot of you probably know. And if not, looking forward to getting to know all of you out there. So that's me.
That's perfect. Benjamin Butcher, CEO of STAG.
Thank you for including me in this illustrious cast. STAG is a almost 10-year-old REIT that focuses on logistics properties in basically in the lower 48. We're a relative value investor. We own 450 properties, about 90 million square feet, and a very active acquirer of individual assets across the U.S.
Thank you, sir. Michael Murphy, Chief Development Officer of CenterPoint.
Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm the Chief Development Officer, as Pete said, for CenterPoint. We're a 62 million square foot industrial platform in about 10 markets throughout the U.S., mostly high population centers tied to port and intermodal. We're owned by CalPERS. We've remained very active during this period. We have about 6 offices throughout the U.S., about 115 total employees, development, acquisitions, and asset management. And I think the prognosis looks good for us, even with all the issues we've encountered in the last couple of months.
That's your panel, and it's a very, very impressive panel. I want to talk a little bit, guys, about the audience. We have 1,000+ people listening in right now. About a third of them are commercial real estate brokers. We've got a lot of tenant clients out there. IWLA, the International Warehousing Logistics Association, which is the premier 3PL group, is one of the sponsors, and they have a lot of their members on. IAMC, Industrial Asset Management Council. I happen to be on the board of both those organizations, so I know a lot of their members are on here too. So we've got a very, very knowledgeable group of people, and when they registered, part of the registration included an agenda that had certain questions on it. Then I'm going to start with one of you, and then I want the rest of you to chime in with your thoughts. And then when we get through those questions, because we've got some time, we'll ask some more questions from the audience. And you can do that by going to the chat room and just plugging in a question, and I'll be able to monitor those questions, and I will get those out there as time allows. And then the last 10, 15 minutes, we will open up to questions to the audience. So if you've got questions for the 4 panelists or for myself, please feel free to reach out. So looking at the agenda, the first question on the agenda was near-term outlook for industrial real estate as an asset class. I could answer that question, and we'll have some comments, but let's start with Scott and work from there. Scott, how do you see the near term for industrial?
I'm not sure if Scott is on.
Yeah, Scott's having difficulty getting back on. We're working with him in the background. He should be back very soon.
Let's go to Michael Murphy.
So near term, we've seen pretty good leasing activity even in these last couple of months. Our development activity has slowed in terms of, new spec. Certainly we've put that on hold. But I'm optimistic. I certainly think the e-commerce segment, the last mile segment has continued to be strong. That e-commerce platform is only going to take on, more of retail sales. And I think that's a growth piece. I think as we're opening up, we're definitely seeing the third-party logistics firms being more active. I think port activity has slowed dramatically throughout the U.S. I think that's going to probably be third or fourth quarter till that comes back in a big way. But I'm optimistic. I think the future for industrial is solid. certainly within the markets that we serve, I see demand increasing. And again, with less spec out there, I think there'll be less supply, and hopefully we'll be able to, stay in somewhat of equilibrium.
Michael, your offices, are you pretty much business as usual now with your offices?
No, we are fully closed.
Okay.
We just opened the Houston office, but all the other offices are closed. Everyone's been working remotely. We just have felt, luckily our MIS group had us really prepared for this. And we've been able to be very efficient during this last 3 or 4 months. We're evaluating opening probably over the summer into the fall, but really feel like we've been able to run the business remotely thanks to the setup and the infrastructure in place.
Well, I like your optimism. I'm very, very optimistic too. I mentioned earlier, I'm talking to 50 people a day, and they're clients, they're brokers, they're people in the industry. I'm getting a sense of optimism, but I think that's kind of an important question. So I want everybody else to kind of chime in. Ben, would you kind of give us your thoughts on the near-term outlook for industrial?
Well, I think that, the typical recessionary playbook is retention goes up, spec leasing goes down, rent growth declines or ceases. This doesn't feel necessarily like a typical recession in many ways, but I do think that the decline in GDP will be felt in demand to some extent. But you have already mentioned some of the other factors that are going to counteract that. Obviously, the huge demand in e-commerce. We've done in the first 2 months of the second quarter, we did twice as much leasing as we did the whole first quarter. And more than half of that is long-term leases to e-commerce tenants. But in addition to e-commerce, you also have the onshoring, fattening of supply chains, redundancy, resiliency, whatever terms you want to use on supply chains is an impact. And I think longer term, reshoring, onshoring will have some impact on industrial demand. So I think it feels like, as opposed to perhaps other recessions, the industrial sector will slide through this recession, no matter how long it may persist or how short it may be, because of these additional demand drivers.
One thing you didn't mention, Ben, that I'm going to throw out there is safety stock. And we're hearing a lot of our clients, they kind of got caught a little bit with this pandemic of not having enough inventory. And we're hearing anywhere from 5 to 15% additional safety stock. Are you hearing the same thing?
Yeah, that was what I talked about, fattening of supply chains. So okay. the world that had trended for a while towards just-in-time inventory to lean manufacturing and a variety of other terms. Obviously, the pandemic pointed out yet again that this doesn't necessarily work well. The Thai floods, the Japanese tsunami, Mexican social unrest over the past 10 years have all pointed that out. I think this time, perhaps because it was some of the shortages were in health supplies, which people felt was ended up being life and death or perceived as a life and death issue. Maybe made it hit home a little harder this time, but that issue has been there. You shut down an auto plant because you don't have a 10-cent plastic part. It's pretty painful.
Are you guys active in Mexico?
No.
Okay, because our people in Mexico are saying that they're talking like a lot of our brokers, very, very busy right now. Nick, why don't you chime in and share your thoughts on where you think we're at?
Sure. So if you rewind to early March, the capital markets in industrial were as robust as I've ever experienced. I oversee our acquisitions and dispositions. The pricing, the interest level, the breadth of buyer pools was as broad and deep and attractive from a marketplace. Again, as I've ever seen it. The demand for owning industrial product from different capital sources was as robust as ever. Fast forward now to 3 months, looking back, there are various points over the last 3 months where, the days were darker than they are today, I think, in terms of what this intentional shutdown of the American economy that we just experienced was going to do to some of the points that Ben was making about demand, and everyone readjusted all their MLAs, and you know, a lot of transactions fell out of bed and paused, and so, you know, as we sort of reflect back on that, where we are today, and you look at the public equity markets, what they're doing in terms of valuing our sector, you look at capital flows, the capital that wanted to be in our space in early March, in my opinion, still wants to be in the industrial space. And then I think we have incremental capital now that's shifting out of other asset classes that had some of their challenges accelerated through the last 3 months. So that's sort of on the capital flow side. On the demand side, I share some of Ben's, you know, cautiousness about what a recession does to industrial demand. We have 6,000 unique tenants, over 9,000 suites. We have a lot of different size tenants in our portfolio. The last 3 months, you know, it's tough conversations talking to tenants about their businesses, and tenants are applying for PPP and really trying to get through. And in many cases, on the smaller tenant side, it's their livelihoods for them and their families. And so, you know, we're very cognizant that, you know, there is going to be demand pressure, you know, from the prolonged effects of this. You know, and the question is, does the sort of secular tailwinds that have all been mentioned around e-commerce and reshoring and inventory buffering and everything else, you know, overcome some of that? And what we've started to see in our portfolio is while it wasn't evident immediately, you know, these sort of obvious sectors and obvious geographies are the sort of epicenter of the challenges. And so and so if you can isolate the risks around some of those geographies that are more exposed to the risks around prolonged, you know, disruption to travel and tourism, et cetera, and certain industries that are also have prolonged, you know, effects here, I think you can manage through it. And the capital markets, in my view, will be even more robust for our asset class coming out of this. And it'll just depend on your returns about how well the demand side of the equation plays out. So
we all of you mentioned, and I don't know, is Scott back on? Can you hear us, Scott?
I can. It's a little spotty, but can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. And all the guys have addressed the same question. We're just kind of, from their perspective, from their individual perspectives, from their company's perspectives, they're just kind of giving their overview on what the near-term outlook is for industrial real estate as an asset class. It's been pretty optimistic. Love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Sure. You know, just by way of introduction, I know I missed the introductions. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for Brennan Investment Group. And, you know, so I didn't get a chance to hear what the other panelists had to say. So as far as, you know, kind of our viewpoint of kind of where, you know, where the industrial market is, I think it's probably similar to at least what I did hear, is that, you know, the industrial market itself, I think, is going to, you know, benefit from some of the impacts of, you know, COVID and all that with onshoring. I heard someone talk about that. I think we do realize that there's a kind of supply shortage, or there's a supply stock that we need to have of certain, you know, things, and certain parts, industries are going to be moving back to the United States, or at least they're going to be doing it regionally. You definitely see, you know, medications and other things like that. And so we're a big owner of a lot of kind of manufacturing and those type of buildings. We have probably over 150 of those buildings throughout our portfolio throughout the United States. And we were seeing onshoring even before COVID. We were seeing companies, because of robotics and other those type of things, where the labor advantages when they moved to Mexico and they moved to China have kind of largely dissipated. And by some of these companies have moved back, and I just think that will be spurred and increase in the velocity that it was already happening over the last, I'd say, 2-3 years. And, you know, we've seen several companies that, you know, we have a building that has 800 parking spots in it, and they use 100 of them because they've gone to robotics, and a lot of their manufacturing has changed. And so we would definitely see that happening in U.S. manufacturing, along with all the other, you know, political reasons. You've got, you know, definitely some, you know, many countries, you know, with there's tariffs, there's, you know, political strife throughout different parts of the world, and you'll see, right now, I think they say 72% of drugs are manufactured outside the United States. And I think this has kind of exposed the political and some of the other issues that will be making that manufacturing, kind of reshoring that back to the United States. So I think we'll be the beneficiary of that in the industrial market, as well as the e-commerce and the other things that I heard, Nick and Ben talk about briefly.
I'm going to echo that. I think it's like 95% of antibiotics are manufactured in China, which you learn so much during this pandemic, things that I had no idea was going on. I knew a lot of our manufacturing was in China. I did know the extent of it. I'm going to give everybody a brief overview from my perspective as well. Again, I talk to so many people every day, and the most common thing I'm hearing from our 600 plus industrial brokers, and I literally hear it a dozen times a day, is they've never been busier in their careers than they are right now. So we're hearing from a lot of companies, all the same things you're hearing, and for the same reasons. Companies are re-exploring. They're doing network optimizations. They went through, I think Ben mentioned, just in time to having more safety stock. And so they're reinventing themselves and trying to figure out what they're doing, if it's the most efficient way to do it. And so the activity level, the optimism, the bullish attitudes that the four of you just expressed, I'm hearing that with the clients as well. And then to tackle something that Scott just said about some nearshoring and onshoring was already going on, I found that to be accurate as well. For example, I think you guys probably all know Kevin Dahlhaupt over at Hanes Brands. They moved out of Asia 3 years ago. So more and more manufacturers, for all the reasons that Scott just said, are looking at other alternatives. And labor is such a big driver. And as we get more sophisticated, that's going to be less of an issue. So I'm gonna talk to you guys about something that was a huge issue in February, and then with everything that happened, didn't become an issue. And I want you to comment on it, and I'm going to start with Scott and work backwards. One of the things that we heard from the clients, like, very, very consistently, and I heard it at the IMC conferences and I heard it at the IWLA conferences, what are your biggest challenges? And it was labor. And when you have millions and millions of people unemployed, that doesn't seem like it's going to be an issue. But assuming that we're all correct and there is going to be growth and the people changing the way they move their products, I think labor is going to be an issue again, and it's going to happen a little bit sooner than people think. Starting with Scott, talk to me about what you're hearing from your clients regarding labor issues and what you think the outlook is for the balance of the year into 2021.
I'm in the background here trying to get Scott connected up with Alan and Katie. We'll
go to Michael. We'll go to Michael until we can hear from Scott.
Well, look, I think most of our tenants, to Nick's point earlier, our average tenant size is about 150,000 feet. Most of our tenants, like 85% or more, continued operating during this last 3 to 4 months. Labor has always been a big issue nationally, certainly in our big cities and outside of our cities. Probably cooled to some extent to your comment in the last couple months. But our basic distribution, it needs labor. It's not the highest cost labor. It's been hard to find that segment, that well-trained segment. So I do think as things heat up and we roll into 2021, we'll continue to encounter that. Certain distributors have gone somewhat automated. I think that'll continue as a trend over the years, but labor in our warehouses and our trucking industry, I think will continue to be an issue as the economy comes back, as demand comes back, probably into the later portion of this year in 2021.
I heard a stat, and this is a couple of years old, so I have to believe it's only gotten worse. But I was at a conference and they said that the average age of the over-the-road truck driver is 57 years old. And they were having a real hard time finding people willing to do that for a living. So that's something that we all have to think about and all have to start thinking about solutions for. Going to Ben, a lot of these retail jobs that went away, aren't going to be coming back real soon. Is it possible that some of the retail workers, waiters, waitresses, people that work in the retail stores might find themselves in distribution centers? Do you see the same labor issues I do?
Well, labor is certainly a big issue, but I don't think you're going to get the Gap worker to go work in a warehouse very easily. I think it's not only the availability, it's the quality of the labor and the sort of the culture of the labor. We've talked about reshoring, onshoring. One would expect that's going to benefit places like, Wisconsin, Dayton, Ohio, Cleveland, places where there's an abundance of skilled workers who may be available to work. But it's also the kind of workers 10 plus years ago, we used to buy call centers, really bad idea. And I'm glad we stopped doing it. But the best single call center the Bank of America had in the world was in Belfast, Maine. And it was because the people they'd hire them, they wouldn't quit, they'd show up to work every day, et cetera. And so it's not just, there's 4% unemployed in this market. That means there's 2,000 people available for jobs. It's the nature and the culture of the labor that's available. In addition to, if you have 1,000 unemployed retail workers and you need to hire 50 warehouse workers, you may be pressed to find the 50th one out of that 1,000. But I just don't think they transfer that easily.
I truly believe it's going to be an issue, and a lot of people kind of raise eyebrows when I say that, but that was such a key component on the challenges in February. And as this economy gets back, it's something, again, we're going to have to all keep our eye on. I'm going to switch topics a little bit, and Ben just made a comment that made me think of another question we're going to ask. We're going to start with Nick this time. Nick, talk to the audience about what markets that you are seeing that still will be good for spec development. What are some of the emerging markets that you're working on without giving too much away about your business plan? But what markets do you see in the next 6 months of really coming back strong, and why?
Yeah, sure. So, we have a pretty active development business. We've got about $1.4 billion of speculative development under construction across the U.S. over a number of projects. Our particular effort has been focused to date on really gateway markets and building out Class A buildings, obviously in sort of the best primary markets in the U.S. I think it's a pretty distinct strategy, and not to suggest that there aren't opportunities to develop and make money in other markets. I think it's specific to how we're funding it and portfolio composition and everything else that we're doing on our side. We continue to like that from a risk-adjusted standpoint, but we've been closely monitoring other markets too, and obviously the supply of new stock affects our significant positions in most of the markets in the U.S. So what's been fascinating to see over the last couple of months is the sort of lower barrier, higher supply markets in places like Atlanta and Dallas, or South Dallas and Southern Atlanta and in West Chicago. I mean, there's been so much absorption from e-commerce of big buildings in these markets over the last couple of months that we all thought that was an area of weakness, frankly, for the development business. And if you had a 1 million footer in Atlanta over the last couple of months, you probably just leased it up. So these things ebb and flow, and I still believe that demographics sort of cures all. And you look at where people are moving, to the extent that COVID and flexible lifestyles and working from home and things can accelerate some of the movement of people that's been happening for a long time. Unfortunately, I'm from Rhode Island, and for Ben, who's in Massachusetts, we haven't been the beneficiaries of positive demographics. And that's really been at the benefit of the Southwest and Southeast. And so, I still think there are opportunities to build high quality product in these higher growth markets from a demographic standpoint, irrespective of what the next 4 to 6 or 12 months mean from a supply standpoint. So there's some pretty tight, smaller markets in the Southeast still. We've seen a little weakness in Charlotte, which is, I would say an example of a pretty good demographic market where you want to own, smaller buildings to address the growing population, and big buildings have gotten leased in the last couple months and smaller buildings have been slower, but we expect that to find its equilibrium over the next year. So, we're really looking at, talking about in that context, Tampa and Nashville and Orlando and Raleigh and obviously down into Texas, Austin and even Dallas with all the supply that's come online. Dallas, frankly, today, and probably highly correlated to how quickly they've decided to open up post-COVID. The leasing market today in Dallas is very strong on a relative basis, and I think that's the same goes for Atlanta, even for suites of all sizes. So I don't know if I answered the question or not, but that's.
I think you had a lot of good information in there. Ben, what markets do you like?
In defense of Rhode Island and their great governor in Boston, we may be flat in terms of growth, in terms of body count, but not in terms of income. And so you have pretty dramatic increase in income in places like Boston. And I think e-commerce is probably maybe fairly highly correlated to income levels, as well as to just body count. So I think that there's probably a lot of opportunity in some of these northern cities that may not be experience population growth, but they are still experiencing quality of job or cost of job kind of growth. We think there's plenty. We look at about 65 markets across the country. We actually opened our first remote office in Dallas, so we agree Texas is always a place you want to have your eyes on. I think there's echoing Nick's comments, places like the Lehigh Valley, people were whispering about the supply concerns there. That nobody's whispering about that anymore because all the big buildings have been leased. People are, like mostly Amazon, but other people are positioning themselves for the post-COVID world where e-commerce is, depending on who you talk to, has accelerated 2, 3, 5, 10 years in terms of its adoption because of the impact of the pandemic. And again, it's mostly Amazon, in a lot of markets, but there are other people too that are getting ready for that post-COVID world.
What other markets you like outside the Northeast?
My favorite term, we exhibit agnosticity. We're agnostic as to markets. We're looking for that's one of the things that, as Nick talked about, the growth and the demographic-driven growth. That's certainly an element in terms of in terms of the returns you get from owning an industrial property. But the most important thing is what your basis is. It's really hard to make money. The guys who are buying industrial assets in Northern California for $300 or $400 a foot, that may work out well. It has never worked out well in the past. So I think having a reasonable eye towards what your basis is an important part of making money in industrial real estate. I mean, it's great to have 5% revenue growth. We're more likely to buy a 7.5 cap asset growing 2% a year than a 3.5 cap asset growing 5% a year. Takes a long time for that 3.5 cap to catch up.
Yeah, you probably have about 4 markets are going to explode. You're just not going to share, and I get that.
Well, I'll tell you, the market that is the most challenged of all the markets that we operate in is Houston. That's where we've seen the most in terms of rental concessions and leasing weakness.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Houston. We had a guy named Peter Zion do a webinar for a big group of our clients, and he's kind of a global, kind of a futurist economist kind of a guy. And I asked him what market he saw, or what markets. I asked him the same question that he saw exploding, and the only market he mentioned was Houston. And the reason he was so excited about Houston.
The key to outperformance is underperformance. If you have a really bad year, it's easy to have a good year the next year.
Right.
Well, and it's also you got plenty of labor available right now with the oil industry.
Yeah.
Michael, do you have any thoughts on markets that you like?
Well, I'd echo obviously what's been said. Our strategy is very specific, very tied to gateway markets, very tied to infill development. These are long cycle deals. From acquisition to delivering a product can be 3 years. The markets we like are the markets we're in. Seattle, the Northern California market. We have a new project we're delivering in Oakland, LA. We love. We do have a decent exposure in Houston, a pretty decent portfolio, well leased. Not a lot of new development down there. We love Miami, New Jersey. And even that Savannah corridor in Greenville, up near the BMW manufacturing plant. We've done some work there. So again, we're very specific to what we're doing, both on the acquisition and the development side. We stick to our knitting, we stick to our strategy. But we in Chicago, we did break ground last month on a 1.1 million square foot spec building down in Joliet, tied to our 2 intermodal and our business park there. That market, as was mentioned by Nick, and the fundamentals of Atlanta and Dallas, within probably 6 months of 19, that I-55 and I-80 market absorbed 6 million feet. Amazon and others, but really strong leasing in that marketplace to where there's really not a lot of product available. We look forward to delivering in probably the summer of 21, hoping that demand will be strong and limited supply. But we're very careful on spec. We're really a build-to-suit developer. But again, I think the fundamentals of the markets I touched on, there's just not a lot of land, high barriers to entry, pretty strong demand, good demographics in terms of population, and certainly the rise of e-commerce, I believe, will continue.
I don't know. I know Scott's been able to jump in and off. I don't know if you can hear me, but Scott, if you can hear me, do you have any thoughts on markets that you're high on the coming months?
Yes, I'm actually on now. I've got help from your department there, so I hopefully you're probably getting a big picture in my head, but I'll try to do that. Yeah. So, and I didn't hear what the other gentleman said, so I will. I think we've been kind of over the last, I'd say, several years, been very bullish on any markets with high demographic growth. And so, we've done quite a bit in Denver, Salt Lake City. We're looking in Reno, Austin, really anywhere in Texas, Atlanta, the Southeast, Charlotte. We've done a lot in kind of I-4 corridor. And so Nashville is a market we want to get into. And so those are the markets that we continue to see because, the population growth, of course, creates demand that isn't there. And most of those markets have been pretty tight. But we also are, fairly bullish on some of the larger markets that are more, established. I'm looking into, Philadelphia and Lehigh Valley. We just bought something recently. We're looking at developments in, Baltimore. We're active, obviously, based in Chicago there as well. So, there is, I think we are, bullish on a good part of the population. There are certain markets that, we thought have been maybe overpicked, or there's just a lot of competitors out there that maybe spend a little less time in, or, for instance, like the Inland Empire obviously is a great market, but the margins that we can make there have been a little harder for us to, spend a lot of time there. So we spent less time there and worked into more, secondary markets where we thought there was a little more margin available to us.
You've all mentioned e-commerce because it's such a huge part of what we do, and it makes sense. E-commerce has been growing, significantly growing, exponentially growing over the last several years. But this pandemic was forcing people that swore they would never buy anything online to buy things online, and we find out that they like it. It works, so it is going to grow. I think Ben said 4, 5, 6 times higher than it normally did. So what does that mean to our industry? How does that make you think about what you guys want to build in the future, knowing that the e-commerce is growing exponentially? And how's that going to impact last mile? And how do you guys look at last mile? And we'll start with Scott and work back from Scott.
Yeah, well, you've seen a lot of kind of infill dense locations. An example, in Chicago, in some neighborhoods that were older building, older stock that have kind of benefited from e-commerce, and I think you're seeing that in a lot of markets throughout the country where you're getting, they're filling in, a lot of spaces and buildings there. But what I've also seen is that in addition to the e-commerce, cold storage has been, taking up a lot of infill locations, and there's, growth in that market that's definitely underserved. There's quite a shortfall there, and even, data centers and other type of use, even though they're not technically industrial real estate, they are taking land that is, real estate the land that would be used for, and so all of that is really kind of pushed quite a bit of demand there. And you've seen that, where typical vacancy rates, I think historically in a lot of that kind of those infill older locations had been, 10, 15%. In a lot of markets, they're less than 5%. And so there will be opportunities. We definitely have looked, and we've done where we've taken an existing building in Des Plaines, Illinois, as an example. We scraped the building there and we put up another building there. And I wouldn't say it was e-commerce, but it's e-commerce light, I would say. Pet Food Experts was one of the tenants that moved into that building. And we're seeing that kind of throughout our portfolio, that we're looking at in kind of older stock buildings sometimes. And we're working on several acquisition opportunities throughout the United States where we will potentially buy a building and scrape it and put in a new, more modern facility that can accommodate e-commerce and kind of ancillary uses.
Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'd say, 10 years ago, we were really focused on that first mile, that inbound transload movement. I would say in the last, 6 to 7 years on the acquisition side, we've always had a strategy of looking for low covered buildings in good locations where you had a yard, where you had an area for trucks and vans. That has proven to be, very strategic. As we've had great locations and buildings that we could convert for that last mile, both throughout the country, LA, New Jersey, and then we've really started doing a little more specific development relative to last mile, working with the transportation companies, the big e-commerce companies. And that model it's a tough one to spec because of the coverage ratios and making the dollars work. You really need a client that sees value in the yard and is willing to pay you for that yard, because the coverages on these buildings is, it's 15%. Hard to make the numbers work on the last mile segment, but we really like it. And again, we think the location of it, the driver, the long-term nature of it, really will provide the returns we want. Good credit tenants, good opportunity to put some of these more antiquated buildings or sites into production in a more meaningful way. And obviously, we still love the big box, but that last mile segment has become a bigger percentage of our portfolio in the last few years.
Michael, that room is very, very red that you're in.
Yes,
you look like an IU Hoover with that room.
She painted it. It's the Manhattan room from Lake Forest, Illinois. We wanted a little bit of Manhattan, so I appreciate you noticing.
It looks good. Ben, do you have anything? If you don't have any additional thoughts,
I would tell you, last mile is the most overused and least applicable term to industrial. So in the supply chain, whether it's trucks or containers or whatever, the goods have to move in bulk, and so the question is, where do they stop moving in 18-wheelers and when do they start moving in panel trucks, drones, bicycles, people on foot or whatever? And that's not inside of cities. You can't get 18-wheelers effectively inside cities. And so people like UPS told us that their defined last mile facility is a 500,000-foot building on the ring road around populations. It's not 100,000 feet or 75 or 50,000 feet inside the building. For them, the last mile building is out on the ring road. And there was, I think NAIOP did a study, it's probably 4 years ago now, and they looked at 378 dedicated e-commerce facilities around the country, and they discovered that they were exactly the same as the average industrial building in terms of, percentage A, B, and C quality, clear heights, age, et cetera. And so again, I frequently say this, and I'm probably completely wrong, but I think last mile is the most overused term. The industrial infrastructure that delivers goods to the U.S. consumer is a bulk system. It's moving lots of goods, and it's using, again, containers, 18-wheelers, whatever, to get it close enough to whether it's being delivered to stores. And again, still 85% or so is going through. So maybe during COVID, it's down now to 70% is going through stores, but still the preponderance is going through stores. And even the stuff that's going in directly to consumers is going through buildings that 18-wheelers can effectively get to. And those are the buildings that I think most of us own, added around ring roads, around variety of populations, not just New York, Chicago, LA, et cetera. It's also Cleveland, Cincinnati, Dayton, a bunch of Knoxville, it's a bunch of other places around the country that have populations, and all of it goes through buildings that are approachable by 18-wheelers, and that remains the big part of the industrial infrastructure in the U.S. And I know a lot of these webinars and conferences love to focus on last mile, but it's the backbone of industrial infrastructure, which is, you know, the 300,000 foot buildings out on the ring road are where most of the activity happens.
And
Well,
Pete, I would just add too to that, if I may. The way that we think about it is you know, maybe somewhere in between, just because the scale of what we're trying to do with Blackstone, that we need to do it in such scale. We have million-footer fulfillment warehouses and everything, but we, you know, we do have smaller buildings as well, you know, 50, 100, 150,000 foot buildings. And, you know, we're just trying to be proximate to where the ultimate consumer are and the people are. And to Ben's point, a lot of those 150,000 foot buildings, most of them aren't doing e-commerce last mile fulfillment, right? They're an HVAC guy who's servicing the trade area, or it's a local business that's where the proprietor lives, or what have you. We have seen some incremental demand around, you know, e-commerce on those types of spaces. It's pressurized vacancy in those markets. Yeah, and I do think that we also try and identify on the smaller buildings, you know, relevant aggregations of real estate that could be reconfigured for a very specialized last mile use. We've all seen what Amazon's doing with AMTLs, and my guess is 3PLs will end up, if they need to, you know, meet the sort of same day requirements, you know, need to have some node, infrastructure. Probably not exactly what Amazon's doing, but to be able to compete from a delivery standpoint. So, you know, we're trying to be intelligent about it, but in the meantime, you know, it's a lot of the American economy that's leasing your space in close. This is the older real estate stock in many cases, because it's, you know, it's in higher end residential areas and stuff. And so we like to own that stuff. We institutionally maintain it and run it, and we feel like it offers value as a landlord to our different tenant mix, to be able to provide that product as a space to offer. But I wouldn't characterize it all as last mile. I would say it could be for the right user if they needed it to be, but it could also have flexible for, you know, other value to.
I was going to interrupt that. Our friends at Prologis are always right about everything. You know, they for a long time kind of ignored the fact that they owned a bunch of 18 to 22 foot clear buildings. You know, notably when you go from O'Hare into downtown Chicago, you go by millions and millions of square feet of Prologis owned 18 and 20 foot clear buildings. And so they used to not talk about them, and now they brag about them as last mile. But to Nick's point, they have HVAC contractors. They have all kinds of other users in there that aren't e-commerce, but need to be proximate to populations. And so that's, you know, that is, I think the fact that demand is strong for those kinds of buildings it's always been strong for those kinds of buildings, because there are people that need to be close to job sites, et cetera. But it's not, I mean, e-commerce demand for that kind of building is incremental, but it's not what drives the good cash flow characteristics of those buildings.
Right, but it is making that demand from e-commerce is just putting more pressure on and creating less vacancies. And so, you know, and we've seen it in our portfolio, not a lot, you know, because I agree, most of what we have of that kind of BC product type is not e-commerce, but we do see them sometimes sniff around on a vacancy.
Yep.
Sure. I'm getting a lot of texts from people as we're talking, and some of them are really good. Mark Colford out of Minnesota says, I'm looking really good. Bob Gallant.
He said that to me too, though.
Yeah. So, but there were a couple of serious ones. One of them was they were curious, each of you, and we can start with Scott again and work backwards. They're interested to know what percentage of your business, your current business, and that I guess that can be either the people looking for space or the people actually in space. What percentage are 3PL, and do you see that growing? Do you see it going down? Where do you see the trend? Starting with Scott.
Yeah, I think we're probably on the lower end of the spectrum, because we do have quite a bit of manufacturing in our portfolio. So, you know, our 3PL, I'm probably not the best person to answer this question, because I would say we're more like 30, maybe 25, 30% of it, you know, of our portfolio is that. And is it growing? You know, we're actually focusing quite a bit on corporate real estate. So I actually think probably that is probably holding steady or even shrinking our portfolio.
Michael?
So I would say, large retailers are probably a solid 40%. I think 3PLs generally are probably another 40%. We do a lot near the ports, a lot of transload. So we're taking international cans, breaking that down for, domestic consumption. So we do, I think probably, I'm going to guess 40% are 3PL clients, and they're growing, but their life is 3-year contracts, fighting for the next contract, fighting for a new business. And the big retailers are a big portion of that. And again, the last mile facilities I touched on are being, adapted specifically for last mile within our portfolio. And that's probably the other 20% approximately.
On a related note, and I want Ben and Nick to answer this question as well, but on a related note, what I am seeing, and again, I'm on the board for IWLA, so I talk to 3PLs constantly. I am seeing growth, and what I'm also seeing is much longer term leases, because the investment, and a couple of you have mentioned this, the investment the companies are making on robotics and material handling equipment requires longer commitments from the company, or they put something in the contract that if they lose the contract, that the actual manufacturer takes over the lease term. But when you answer about 3PLs, also address whether you're seeing longer lease terms from the 3PLs. And go ahead, Michael. Are you seeing some 3PLs doing longer lease terms?
We still see 3 to 5 as a general rule. And to your point, I think it's all based on their contract and their client. And if they're putting in sophisticated picking systems and automated systems to enable that client to do more business, then yes, they're either getting the longer contract or they're getting the termination payback, which seems to be pretty standard, dependent upon what they're doing, dependent upon the investment they're having to make.
Ben, what percentage of Stag's business is 3PL?
Embarrassed to say I don't know. XPO is our third largest tenant, but I'm embarrassed to say I don't really know. E-commerce, we have 40-something% do some kind of e-commerce out of one of our buildings, and I think 15% are 15 or something like that are dedicated e-commerce, but I don't have the 3PL number in front of me.
Nick? Nick's muted for some reason.
Yeah, hit your microphone button again.
Oh, sorry, guys. Yeah, so I think that the 3PL business is going to increase market share from a demand standpoint. Again, witnessing what Amazon's doing to build out their fulfillment network has been extraordinary, exciting for our industry. I think the 3PLs will play an interesting part in allowing, alternative, distribution channels for, to Amazon. And so we see them taking, more and more space. They're 8 of our top 20 tenants are characterize them as logistics companies. So they're an important part of our business, a growing part of our business. And, just working with them to figure out what types of space that they need. They always, want flexibility and tying things to contracts is a key part of managing their risk on their end. And it's just a function of the negotiation and the space you have and whether they need it and when they need it. But, we see them as an exciting part of our business and a way to grow, within our portfolio. So
I might also add that Amazon is a third-party logistics provider, maybe the biggest third-party logistics provider. The other thing I didn't mention earlier is one of the things in the recession playbook when you asked about lease terms is typically in recessions, lease terms go down. Tenants looking for optionality. They're not unsure about the future. We haven't, I would say we in our portfolio haven't seen that. Much of any of that happened so far. The tenant conversations have not changed dramatically pre-COVID to post-COVID.
That's very interesting. While you bring that up, Ben, I'll ask each one of you to address in China. I think it was Prologis in their report in February. They were ahead of us, obviously, in the pandemic. And I don't want to quote the wrong numbers, but they were surprised how quickly the rent collections, people were paying their rent again. How's rent collections been the last couple of months, and how do you see that moving forward? We can start with Ben and work through the group.
So we have, like Michael indicated, we have large tenants. Our average tenant size is about 175,000 square feet. 90% of our tenants have revenues over $100 million. As you might expect with that data, our rent collections are very good, running in the upper 90 percentile, not percentile, percent. So we have not, and also logistics is considered an essential business virtually everywhere. So the only time we really had shutdowns were in tier 1 auto suppliers when plants shut down. And not all of those asked for rent relief, and they all paid rent.
And that plus 90% was in March and April?
March, April, and May.
May.
And June is running ahead of May.
Michael, how are you guys doing with that?
We feel really lucky. You know, we've been monitoring it very closely. You know, I'd say the first week of the month, we've been 87, 88. By mid-month, we've been over 90. We have a couple tenants that pay in arrears based on the deal they cut, but we feel lucky that our rent collections have been very good, back to pre-COVID type numbers. We had about 8 to 10% of our portfolio that asked for some level of concession, which we thought was low compared to what we've seen from the public, the Prologis and the Dukes and others. And we've granted maybe half of those, as deferments where we've asked the clients really to explain what their situation is and how their balance sheet and income statements look relative to the business they have. But again, the magnitude of our tenants have really maintained operations, paid rent, and we feel lucky in terms of the portfolio we have and the quality of our tenants.
Scott?
Yeah, we've been real fortunate. We've really collected at pre-COVID levels all the way throughout. I would say we were about 99% in April, 98% in May, and we're about 92, 93% as of today through June, and we expect to be in the upper 90s as well. And we're a little smaller than Ben's average size. We're probably a little over 50,000. We have about 900 tenants. And I think the only thing I would want to add to that is that we did have about 120 tenants ask in the first month, call it from the end of March until the end of April, ask for some type of relief or whether we're doing it. A lot of them were on fishing expeditions or just maybe trying to take advantage. Once we had a pretty strong stance, we could kind of reposition a few people within the organization to really focus on collections, and we set the hammer down and said rent is due, and we're going to pursue eviction. Other than that, we really didn't do a workout other than in one or two very specific instances, but all the other cases we've gone there. And then depending on the state, we've locked out one or two tenants in Texas, and can't quite do that in Illinois or Pennsylvania or some other states. But we definitely have taken advantage of the law, and there's been all this threats of legislature out there that will the tenants be able to break leases if they can't work something out? I don't know if you heard there's some talk of that going on in California. So at this point we've been able to get everyone to pay, and we'll see if there are a few tenants I think were beneficiaries of the PPP, and if that does end, we might have a few more that might be asking for some type of relief after that burns off.
Nick, I think Link is the only one that hasn't addressed that. Have you talked about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone in our company, all 300 people, know a lot about AR after the last 3 months. We have, as I mentioned, just under 9,000 leases and about 6,000 unique tenants. We have a small business park business in there, which kind of skews the tenant count a bit. But it's been fascinating. It's the net of it is like we were a little bit nervous about May going into May. I think May's outperformed our expectations. We're sort of right on track. Maybe a hair off our sort of pre-COVID collections, and it's pretty isolated, as I said, to some specific types of businesses. And even with those tenants, we're in active discussions with them. We did receive a bunch of rent relief requests, about 1,400, which sounds like a lot, but it was a lot. But in a lot of opportunistic asks, and as I mentioned before, a lot of tough conversations with tenants about their businesses. But out of it, I really felt like we we've engaged with our tenants in a way about how they use the space, about their businesses, and about how they pay rent, hopefully transitioning any check payers to electronic payers, to clean up the tail, if you will. So we're getting paid at the beginning of the month. But a lot of that work, I think, has been really productive. And I sort of look where we are today going into June, to echo what someone had said, like June is actually tracking ahead of where May is now. And so I think we're optimistic, but realistic about the fact that there are going to be some businesses, either as PPP starts to roll off now in early June from the first recipients, there's going to be some challenged businesses, and we remain in active dialogue with those. And we've granted some deferments, and we're working with those tenants to figure out how they stay in our portfolio. So
I think an important thing to recognize is this is you never want to have an adversarial relationship with your tenants, and this is a potential engendering of an adversarial relationship on the rent relief. And so it's one of the things I spend time with our asset managers. I'm not sure I've made much headway, but about showing some empathy and or using the negotiation to extract something else in lease term, either term or bumps or taking out a clause we don't like or something, but trying to move it away from adversarial to at least some kind of win-win. We're at 40 basis points of relief granted and 60 basis points, another 60 basis points of ongoing discussion. So it looks like we're going to end up at 100 basis points. I think, to me, that sounds like we probably were more adversarial than we needed to be, but we'll see how it works out.
It's the responses I get. First of all, Michael, you may not be as lucky as you thought you were. I think that's been pretty consistent from what I've heard, which to me is amazing. Kind of like the stock market. I was going to ask everybody what they thought about how strong the stock market is, but I just glanced at it and not too strong today with that one. But I do want to. It's been most of what we've been talking about, and most of the commentary I'm getting, making my calls to different people every day, is people are bullish, people are optimistic. They think the industrial is going to be the sector that brings our industry out of the recession. And I agree with all that, but let's talk about things. I used to say a term years ago when I would meet with prospective clients. I'd ask them, what keeps you up at night? And I quit saying it because everybody started saying it, so it sounded stupid. But what are your concerns? And we'll start with Nick, and we'll work through the group. When you're looking at the balance of the year, where you're at today, you've got some good activity, you're collecting the rents. What are the things that we should be looking for? What are the things that concern you? Nick, why don't you start?
Sure. So on the portfolio management side of the equation, I think tracking how PPP roll off translates through into tension for businesses and their ability to pay rent. I think understanding how the reopenings play out across the country. We've seen some spikes in cases in Texas and in Georgia, and there's a lot of noise in all these numbers, and they're testing more people, so there's more cases, and I know there's a lot of different perspectives, but what really matters is people's confidence. It's a decision maker's confidence to sign a 5-year lease in a renewal or a new lease discussion. It's the business confidence that allows, or municipal confidence that allows people to be able to be active in tour spaces and function in a local economy. And so I think the confidence level of the U.S. economy going into the fall and what that holds for our industry, and then how deep the pain was that people having a couple of months in some cases of their businesses turned off, and revenue in some cases literally go to zero or close to it. And so, like how that translates into a real demand pressure, I think is concerning and should be concerning to everybody. Again, there's a lot of bright things and optimistic things that we can be excited about, but that keeps me up at night a bit. And it's not just for the small tenants. There's a lot of mid-sized businesses that actually lease bigger spaces, so it's more impactful to all of us, that are running lower margin businesses but lease space, and like those are meaningful drivers for demand in our business. So those are like understanding that, and we're tracking that very, very closely. And that's what keeps me up on night on that side of things. I think on the capital market side, for, a lot of the folks on the call who are active in the transaction marketplace, the debt markets really aren't back yet for any space, and our space is no exception. That's a bit of an exaggeration. There have been life cos that have been lending, and relationship banks and buyers funding on their lines to acquire real estate over the last 3 months. A lot of core stuff is sort of an adverse selection of what's out there that sellers are willing to part with at limited discounts, if any. And so, I'm hopeful and optimistic that those capital markets come back, and that the CMBS market re-engages and starts originating loans and really creates the underpinning for the capital markets. It's certainly being priced that way now, that debt marketplace is coming back, and I suspect it will. To the extent it doesn't, or takes longer, that I think that could be a prolonged negative to the capital markets. So
There's a lot of good insight there. Ben, what are your thoughts?
I share Nick's concern that you'll have we've had a surge in demand as people position themselves for the post-COVID world. And, maybe that positioning gets sort of more played out, and we go back to more normal demand drivers, and, COVID 2.0 and the lack of business confidence, the consumer savings rate stays elevated, so consumption doesn't come back as quickly. I think the reality, if that hits the reality of, again, all of this is a biofeedback loops, all these realities hit, you could have when asked whether it's a V-shaped recovery or whatever, I've always said the swoosh. I just don't know how elevated that swoosh is going to be. And on top of that, you're going to have the next 5 months or whatever is going to be a shit show of political whatever that probably won't do much for business confidence either. Capital markets, we've been able to operate in these capital markets. We were fortunate. We went into the COVID crisis with probably our best balance sheet and liquidity ever. But it's, certainly with stocks trading, well, they're trading down a lot today, but have been trading down below NAV in our case, makes it more difficult to issue equity. And we've been successful in the bank market, the unsecured bank market, and we also operate in the private bond market. Both those are open. They're not where they were in February, but you can get business, or at least we've been able to get business done in both markets, or could get business done in both markets. So we're not worried about the capital markets, but I do think that the impact of the capital markets of a non V-shaped recovery or a less robust recovery than I think people are expecting will be felt, and it'll make things difficult. I do think that the public companies and people with capital like Nick's company will do well in that environment, because the private operators who use secured debt won't be able to operate. We'll have a harder time operating.
This is really, really good intel. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Portfolio management has been our number one issue, just maintaining our tenants. We've done a lot of renewals. We've leased a lot of spec space. So that's been first and foremost. On the investment side, Nick touched on it. I think the core plus world, we've had some visibility there. We're looking at some interesting opportunities. The value add side is just a fuzzy picture. How much risk do you want to take? What does your underwriting look like? What are the sub-market conditions? Is there going to be shadow vacancy? What are renter rates going to do? I think that's been tougher, both on the development side and the value add acquisition side. But as I've said, I'm optimistic, but I do worry that this gets elongated. COVID-19 has a resurgence in the fall that has a negative impact on demand, and that certainly would slow things down. The development side purely, we're really not doing spec. We're preparing for that, but wanting to see better, focused data points in terms of when we go from a capital markets perspective. We're in an enviable position of, we have a great balance sheet. We have a great owner. Our debt has been secured. We just closed a private placement last week at very attractive terms. So we're prepared. We're ready to go. It's just the fundamentals of the value add business are a little cloudy.
Scott?
Well, I'll echo a lot of the
kind of, actually, I have no problem sleeping at night. I go to bed, I hit the pillow, I'm out. So I guess that I must not worry enough, or I'm too much of an optimist. But I do, worry the same things, the election, COVID, the protests, everything that's going on, all of that, could impact the amount of governmental support, that both, individual and for, at the corporate level, that's got to be paid for in some fashion. So how that all gets kind of done and whether there's a new administration, you recall the last election when, kind of pretty much everything shut down from October through December. It felt like a lot of transactions, people just didn't want to transact. We had a lot of our foreign capital partners saying, until we know what's going on in, with the election results, we're just going to hold off. And so, I think the thing that, we're also pretty well positioned. We work with, right now I'm talking to 25 different capital partners. So we're a little different. We don't have a monolithic capital source. We have insurance companies. We have, we've done crowdfunding even. We've done, high net worth individuals and family trusts. We have a lot of foreign capital partners, a lot in the Middle East and Asia. And so I've talked to those groups and a lot of those groups, and we've had more come and talking to us in the last few weeks and few months. And they, really want to reposition more dollars and allocate more dollars towards industrial. So from a seller side, I'm really optimistic about that. From a buyer side, it just makes us filling up a pipeline that much more difficult. We're adding another office. We're doing things to really kind of beef up our pipeline. But I do worry that there is so much money that is being reallocated towards industrial and all the other investors. And then you got, the guys like at Link over there just buying everything up. And it's just, they're just leaving scraps for a few of us guys. So, that's...
Link is going to start doing due diligence this year. I heard that announcement.
I'm sorry, say that?
They're going to start doing due diligence on deals this year.
Oh, okay. So that'll slow them down a little bit.
Hey, I have to apologize. I have to jump. It's been great being on with all you guys, and I apologize, but I have a honeydew that will not let me out.
Understood. Thanks for being on there.
Yeah, thank you so much.
See you.
Okay, guys, we just lost Ben, so I'd like you all to comment. What do you think of Ben? Do you think he's a good guy? I'm just kidding. Can you guys see all the questions? We've got a bunch of questions
I can't.
Okay, good, because it would make your head spin. And we don't have a whole lot of time. We're gonna wrap this up in a few minutes, but we've got over 1,000 people. I think it's around 1,300, and about a third of them are industrial commercial real estate brokers. And several of them have asked from your perspective. You're all leaders in the industry. You work with brokers every day. They're asking you to give a little summary, and we can start with Nick and work around, but give a little summary to all the brokers that are listening in. What are you looking for from the brokers right now? We're in a new era. What's the most important thing you expect to get from the brokers? How do you want them to work with you? How do you want them to communicate? Nick, talk to the brokers for a minute. Tell them what you think.
Sure. So, we're obviously, different brokers specialize in different aspects of the industrial business. I mean, I think from a capital markets standpoint, we've got 3 different investment funds. We've got a Core Plus vehicle with, $16 billion of assets and a lot of capital to put to work. We've got a private REIT business that has been very active in the industrial space over the past few years, is active today in underwriting opportunities for that vehicle. We've got our opportunity fund has $16 billion of capital to deploy, of equity capital to deploy. So, we've got a bunch of capital. We don't need debt to close. When we like things, we jump on them and bring them home on terms and on time and on price. But so we're really looking for interesting opportunities for the 3 different vehicles. So, we're also a platform that's just coming together. We're a couple of different companies and teams and portfolios that have been put together. And the exciting part about 2020 for us is making sure that everyone who's out in this call knows who to talk to at Link and how to find the right person in our regional offices and talk to about transactions. So, identifying off-market stuff and chasing things. We obviously protect brokers and are very comfortable paying brokers. We have worked very successfully with a bunch of Pete's team at Colliers to dig up stuff. We participate in marketed processes across the country. We've sold several billion. We sold $3 billion of individual transactions, over 40 deals last year. So we're selling a lot of stuff too. There's a lot of opportunities to work together from that standpoint. And on the leasing side, just making sure that you guys are getting responsiveness from our team and engage with our team around our portfolio that's in the marketplace. We use leasing brokers in all our markets and very actively dialogue across the country with all of you. So, please, if you don't know folks at Link and want to, we can connect you with the right people. And we've got a new logo that you saw on the sponsorship. Our new website launches in a couple of weeks. So exciting things on the front of the house side from our end, and looking to engage everyone more, more directly. And the last thing I would say is, private equity, typically gets tagged with, oh, well, you're only going to own it for a year or two. So, what does it all mean for me from a relationship standpoint? And I can tell you Blackstone's very serious about investing in this platform and this team for the long run. We have assembled this team deliberately and intentionally to manage this portfolio for the long term. So, I think we're very relationship focused and looking forward to developing all those relationships with all of you. So.
That was an excellent answer. Let's, if you're just joining us, Ben Butcher had to jump, and we're going to start putting up the panelists' name, titles, and company, because several of you have asked that. We introduced them all. That was Nick Pell as the President, Chief Investment Officer for Link. Now we'll hear from Michael Murphy, the Chief Development Officer for CenterPoint. Michael, how would you address that?
Well, I think, hopefully we're one single platform with three legs of the stool, small group of people, great regional teams. So my hope is that the national brokerage group knows our team, from acquisitions and investments to development to asset management. Again, small handful of really skilled individuals. We love to look at any opportunities. I think we're very creative. We don't have, tremendous capital constraints. I think our strategy is pretty clear in terms of the brokerage world nationally, knowing kind of what we're looking for and what we're good at. I think the benefit of what we have is the investment side can see opportunities. The development side can help them make sense of it. If it's something that's a little different, or it's a facility short-term lease that ultimately may be an antiquated building. But we want to see opportunities. We want to, and we spend a lot of time making sure we're very responsive. We don't waste brokers' time. If we say we're not interested, we move on. But if we're interested, we dig in. And we like to think that we're creative. We'll go the extra mile. We'll find the value, even if it's a little cloudy in terms of, where it is. We've done some longer term leasing, some core plus stuff. Candidly, we probably like the value add stuff better because it's a little more complicated, a little more difficult to find. And we love to pay commissions. Love to find good opportunities, make deals, pay commissions, and find tenants. And we've been lucky to do multiple deals with many of our tenants because they've liked our service, they've liked what we've been able to find, and hopefully that's a value proposition to the brokerage community as well.
I will make a comment to all three of you, and I'd say the same to Ben if he's on the phone. And I'm not saying this just to be nice. I wouldn't say anything instead of making something up. Your reputations of your companies and the four of you are extremely strong in the brokerage community. So you should be very, very proud of that. And we'll let Scott wrap up that question with what he'd like to see from brokers, the value he'd like to see them bringing to him. Scott?
Yeah, so I think we have 10 offices throughout the United States, and so we work in a lot of regions, and we've worked with a lot of the brokers with Colliers and other shops, and one of the things that we do, and I think most know, is we do really all things that in the industrial realm. So we will do multi-tenant, we'll do single tenant, we'll do spec development, we do build to suits, we do manufacturing, long-term single tenant net lease type of deals. And so we're out there looking for those things. So really anything that kind of fits in the industrial gambit, we can put into our portfolio. We have different investors, as I said before, and those investors are looking for things. And we do a lot of deals with off market type of situations. Definitely feel free to call our company and say, hey, do you want to just, I know this, it might seem like you're spinning your wheels, waste of time. We're not really sure what the number is or what we can do, but can we preempt the process, or maybe we can kind of kickstart something, and you can bring a opportunity to us, and we're happy to invest the time and make an LOI. And if nothing comes of it, it's no harm, no foul. And I think one of the things that we really have spent this year, we had kind of have a top 10 list every year, and this year coming out of that before COVID was corporate real estate, and we really have made that an initiative. We took one of our co-founders based out in Houston, and we had him. He's spearheading a pursuit effort in corporate real estate, and we've done a few recently. But corporate real estate is really, they're the largest owner. And I know Link and Prologis own a ton of product, but the largest owner of industrial real estate is the user owners. And so, and right now, coming out of COVID, there's a lot of companies that need capital. They don't have access to the debt markets in the way that they probably did before. It's gotten a little more difficult. They have growth strategies. They might need to shore up their balance sheet. And selling corporate real estate, we're working actively on about 10 deals now that we are under contract or going under contract that would qualify as corporate real estate. And we have actually engaged some different brokerage groups to really spearhead it. We have the Colliers Group out in Tampa is actually going out, and we've kind of assigned them the opportunity to go find us corporate real estate opportunities in kind of that I-4 corridor. And we're looking to do that throughout the country. And so we've made, a really a big push towards that. And so of all the areas that we want to do, we wanted to continue to do development. We got 4 million square feet under development. We've got another 6 million square feet that we're kind of looking at, doing in some different projects. But I would say that a lot of our time is spent there, and we work with, because sometimes these deals, the sellers are not sophisticated. So we work with the brokers in helping to educate them. We're not going to have a lot of comp information. We're not going to have other information. Sometimes they don't want to pay the broker. So we got to put it on our side of the transaction. So we're willing to work and be creative and find, solutions to make those deals work. And once we do, it tends to be an ongoing thing. And there's a lot of times opportunities to work with that broker again on, maybe we redevelop, we buy some excess real estate, we redevelop it, we put the building up, they have the opportunity to do the leasing on and the opportunity to sell it. And so, there's more than one bite at the apple for the brokerage community and those opportunities as well. So that's what I'd have to say is probably our biggest initiative right now, and we really are spending quite a bit of time on it.
I got to be honest with you guys. When we first put this together, I was really, really concerned when I saw it was 90 minutes. I thought 90 minutes is a long time, but you guys are extremely good at this. We could do this a lot longer, but we're running up against it. We've only got about 6 minutes left. So I've got 2 questions I'm going to try to fit in. I'm going to apologize. There's literally a couple hundred questions that come across my board, and there's a lot of good questions. There's also a lot of people commenting. I had at least a dozen people that said how much they like the Red Room, Michael. So you got that going for you. But we have heard, or I have heard, talking to a lot of people, that they anticipate a big increase, significant increase on freezer cooler space, which I don't have a whole lot of experience doing. Talk about, starting with Nick, work through, are you seeing the same thing? Are you seeing a lot more freezer cooler space being asked about? Is that something you're going to look at doing more of? Nick?
Yeah, so it's a space we've played in on the investment side for many years, and liked space and have liked it for a long time. I think when you get specialized refrigerated space back, typically in a building or in a multi-tenant building, it's usually not the greatest day. To find a replacement user, it just takes longer, and everyone has their own specs. So I will say, for those types of leasing opportunities, it does seem like there's a lot more demand for that type of space today than there might have been a year ago. And so I think that's great for if for all of us that have some refrigeration within the portfolio. I think that, we've had a bias towards, really port markets for freezer space in particular, and trying to limit our refrigerated footprint to that, just because it's a much deeper demand for the space, and the 3PLs in the refrigerated space are called PRWs, as many of you probably know, and the PRWs really operate the space as a warehouser. And so, I think just finding replacement tenants has always been the issue with refrigeration. I gather the first spec cold building's going up now. In my knowledge, it's ever happened down in South Florida. So we'll see. I think there is, people are ordering more groceries online, and there's a disruption that's happening in the grocery business, and we are underserved from a refrigeration standpoint. So my guess is that need for space ends up getting fulfilled by the PRWs, who are developers themselves. And I don't know how much of a business it is for the landlords like us, and whether we will be spec developing or speccing out vacant space with refrigeration, but I do feel like the demand is noticeably stronger now than it was a year ago.
It looks like we lost our host. Maybe he'll jump back in here real quick. I'm going to throw up a couple slides. I'm hoping that you all can hear me.
I can jump on a little bit with the freezer cooler piece.
Yeah, go ahead.
We've developed a lot. We own a lot, bigger, dry, grocery anchored facilities with cooler and freezer. We've developed a lot of cooler, but generally we've sold it, either build to suit for sale or we've just moved out of it. My issue's always been, and when you look at the cold storage world, Americold and Lineage they have acquired so many operating businesses and assets that they dominate the space. And I think, not to reiterate what Nick said, but I think that our idea of the speccing of it probably isn't something that we're looking at. We're willing to really do cooler. But once you go into freezer and an ammonia system, it really changes your building. It really changes the footprint of what you're doing. So we're interested in it and evaluating it, but it's not a big percentage of our portfolio, and probably not something that we would spec or just do without a user and an operator.
I'm back. I got knocked off for about a minute, but I'm back just in time to say goodbye to everybody. I want to thank the panelists. I've been on a lot of these. The four of you were outstanding. And once again, it was Nick Pell, the President, Chief Investment Officer of Link Industrial, Benjamin Butcher, CEO of Stag Industrial, Michael Murphy, Chief Development Officer of CenterPoint, and Scott McKibben, Chief Investment Officer and Managing Principal of Brennan Investment. You guys were awesome. We couldn't get to nearly a fraction of the questions. I think we could do 3 more of these, but I won't make you do that. And we got a lot of good information out of it. So thank you very, very much for that. And offline, the 5 of us were talking, and I think we all agreed that one certainty in all this world of uncertainty is we all feel very strongly that Purdue will win the national championship in football this year. I really appreciate
Boston College. I thought it for sure was Boston College.
I'll see you at that Purdue-Boston College game coming up in September.
Sounds good.
So I want to thank everybody again. Thanks to everybody that attended. Great panel, guys. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.